Hello, everyone. There is no bigger issue today than immigration, and I'm here with two fascinating people, and we're going to delve into the issues surrounding immigration. And let's start with you, Chief. Take us to Houston, your city. Give us a sense of the immigrant makeup of Houston. It's been described as one of the most diverse cities in all of America.
Well, with all respect to New York City, they're not the most diverse. Houston, Texas is. With about 40% Latino, a large section of, from all over the world, over 1,000 languages spoken. Our fastest growing community is Asian and South Asian, and so it is rich in its diversity, and I think rich in the way that we are really the future of the city of the future, and a picture of what this country is going to look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Mayor, you're from right across the river. Not everybody here has been to Newark. Give us a sense, what does the immigrant population of Newark look like?
Is that right? They should get to Newark.
we can take a tour right after this, but tell us.
Well, like Houston, with 40% Latino, mostly Central South American, Caribbean countries as well. Also English-speaking Caribbean. The continent of Africa, Eastern European. At the same time, some of the older kind of immigrants still coming in. Newark is a port city, so obviously we get a large population of an immigrant community that are coming in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you two have something in common. You are both big officials in sanctuary cities. You're both in battles, in a sense, over this issue with the Trump administration. And Mr. Mayor, you've said that the Trump administration, you've used some provocative language. They're trying to intimidate cities into becoming fugitive slave catchers.
Right.
Well, what did you mean by that?
Neat.
Yeah, what did you mean? What did you mean by that?
Well, the fugitive slave law, if you look historically, called the Bloodhound Law, was actually empowered residents to go after people who the state declared criminal. And begin to capture them and bring them to surveillance and jail. Obviously, they're trying to force the law enforcement community in our cities to act as the same way and force other residents to almost act as lookouts or identifiers to say this person is not documented and they should be turned into ICE. And we refuse to play a part in that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we'll get more into that in a minute. Now, Chief, you have a law that is on the books in Texas right now that makes it a crime for your officers not to cooperate with immigration agents. Why have you been so vocal in fighting this? Give us a sense of this contentious law.
Well, it's SB4, and it's I like to say it's nothing more than political theater that's focused on not on good outcomes and public safety, but more focused on primary politics and trying to get to the next primary election. And it doesn't arrest the officers; it arrests me, the police chiefs. It takes away our ability to, as the officials, with my mayor, my council, and the police chief, we're the best positioned using data, using intelligence to establish what are the priorities for our community. And so it basically prohibits us from telling officers, no, we don't want you to go to the Home Depot and harass day laborers. We want you to go get that MS-13 gangbanger. We want you to go get that other person that's committing violent crimes and property crimes. And we want you to focus on violence, and we want you to focus on people that are doing harm to our society, not people that, but for their immigration status, don't bother anybody, because that's what my community wants.
Right.
Now, the Trump administration is saying that public safety is the very reason why they want immigration agents out detaining repeat offenders, violent, illegal immigrants. Do they have a point, Mr. Mayor?
I think they're completely off the mark. One, they're threatening to take away cops' grants if you don't comply with their order, which means that they're reducing the number of police officers in cities that say they want to become sanctuary cities. In places like Newark, immigrants are more victims than they are perpetrators of crime. So they become victims of crime, easy targets, who do not report to police the kind of abuse and attacks that they get because they're afraid that they're going to be deported. They don't come to court. They don't report it to the precinct. So they're more likely to be victims than actual perpetrators. And it's easier for police officers to do their job when they can get the immigrant communities and undocumented communities to begin to cooperate and respond to police departments and the city agencies without fear of retribution.
And Mr. Chief?
I mean, and for me, you know, again, they call us sanctuary city, but that's a political term that's used way too much by the left and the right. What we are is a welcoming city that our mayor, Sylvester Stern, talks about all the time. But more importantly, we're a focused city. We're a city that has a singular focus on going after people that would do harm to the people that we police and the people that we serve, regardless of their immigration status. We don't care if they're illegal, undocumented, natural-born residents, and quite frankly, when you do that, there's a reason that we want to do that, is because community policing is the key, right? It is the key to public safety. And when you look at the historically low level of violent crime in our big cities, the reason we were able to achieve that despite economic downturns, despite being lean as organizations, is that we've focused so much on community policing in the last 15, 20 years. And now this is completely contrary to that. And it's going to have unintended consequences of making us all less safe.
Now, presumably, neither of you believes that we should completely ignore our country's immigration laws, right? They are there for a purpose. Sort of give us some context where do you think that we should have immigration laws, we should enforce the border?
Well, I think that we were moving in the right direction. I think, obviously, that there should be an expedited process to begin to allow folks to become citizens of this country. That's really what the objective is, to allow, as the country has been for centuries, allowing folks from other places to come here and become citizens of the United States. And this kind of idea that, you know, just fairly recently, people have been coming into the United States and avoiding the strict process of immigration laws, it's just fairy tales. I mean, there are people who have been coming into this country for many, many years in many different ways, and I have used those opportunities to become citizens, whether they become a member of the military or whatever it is they've done, gotten married, all these specific things that help them become citizens. We have to have a really comprehensive immigration policy that allows folks to come into the country and become citizens in a kind of expedited way.
And you know, as the first vice president of the Major City Chiefs Association, we've been calling as police chiefs for comprehensive immigration reform for the last 15 years. That's truly what we need: good, comprehensive immigration reform, where we secure our border, where we have a good, solid guest worker program, where we give people a pathway, not necessarily to citizenship, because as a person that's been an advocate for these issues as a young captain in East Los Angeles back in the day with California Highway Patrol, these people don't care about voting, these immigrant communities. What they care about is legitimacy. They want to come out of the shadows. They want to fully participate. And so I think that there's room on both sides, to the extreme left and to the extreme right. If we can all move to the middle and enact comprehensive immigration reform, we'll all be much better off.
Let me ask you, among police chiefs, among mayors across the country, where does immigration reform rank as one of the big issues that you're facing today? Is it up there? Give us a sense of where.
Well, I think the police department is worried about violence and reducing violent crime and creating a better relationship with the community, which immigration reform is in. But that's more what they're centered on than anything else: how to make the community safe, how to make the city safe, and they don't see immigration as have a real relationship to that, at least in the city of Newark. You know, the mayors obviously in places like Newark think that immigration is important, think is incredibly important. And after World War II, when many people began to leave the cities, and immigrants, these new immigrants came into these cities and began to fill in those gaps and kept these cities afloat, you know, beginning to contribute to the economy, contribute to you know, the social life in the city. To get rid of immigrants in our community, wholesale, undocumented or documented, you know, creates a real economic and social problem for us in places like Newark.
Mm-hmm. And I think from our perspective is when we're starting to see hodgepodge state laws now trying to take and do the federal government's job, it is not a good, that's not a good way to go from a public policy perspective. So because of SB 4 and 1070 in Arizona and other states are starting to have some of these copycat laws, it is a federal responsibility. I think it's about time that the federal government take its job seriously as it relates to immigration enforcement and immigration reform. And more than ever, we need them to take the lead in Congress.
Now, President Obama, when he was in office, was called by some the deporter-in-chief. His deportation numbers were way up there, much higher than previous presidents. You were the police chief in Austin at that time. Give me a sense of what your view was of his his immigration policy, and were you critical? Was it working? Give us a sense.
Well, they used to have what's secure communities, and now the Trump administration has moved back to secure communities, and law enforcement really pushed hard and really lobbied the administration, the Obama administration, to turn that into the priority enforcement program, because we know that there's diminishing returns. If you have limited resources, which the federal government has, we want them to focus on violent criminal offenders, people that are part of transnational gangs, and so they've transitioned the priority enforcement program that focus more on criminal aliens. And so my criticism of his administration was that they didn't do very much to enact immigration reform. And you cannot continue to be an ostrich, put our head in the sand, bury our head in the sand, and ignore 11 to 15 million people and let them become political pawns of the left and the right. And that's what's happening in our country. These are real people. We're supposed to be a Judeo-Christian society, yet we don't deal with people that put food on our table, that do a lot of jobs that nobody wants to do. And now we're being drawn into this issue. We have seen a tremendous reduction in the reporting of crimes in the city of Houston. But what's happened is he was the deporter-in-chief, but the rhetoric wasn't so mean-spirited as it is now. And as children, we learned words matter. And immigrant communities weren't afraid, because they knew that more than likely, if they were, but for their immigration status, were good members of society, they were left alone. But now we've kind of demonized and demagogued not just immigrants, but also people based on their religion from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mayor?
Well, I would have to completely agree with the latter part of what he said. The demonization of entire communities, of entire religions, of entire folks is really what has people on edge. You have people that work at City Hall, who are students, DACA students, who are saying, am I going to lose my job tomorrow? Am I going to be deported? You have parents who are refusing to send their kids to school. We established a municipal ID in the city, and folks are now afraid to even come get the municipal ID because they think it's a ploy to get them to come to the city and turn them over to ICE. So these things are really dangerous. This environment is a dangerous environment. After we spent so much time trying to pull people out of the shadows, people are returning back because of the environment that's being set here. And I think, President Obama should have went further and further, in my view, and as fast as he possibly can, because in my estimation, they don't like anything he did anyway, whether it was halfway or a third of the way. They're trying to repeal every and anything that he came up with. So he should have went as far as he possibly could, as quickly as he possibly could, to institute immigration reform in this country.
The mayor touched on the fear that is out there in his city. Give me a sense of the fear that you sense in immigrant communities in Houston.
Well, it's heartbreaking. I'm an immigrant myself, came here in 1968 with the lotto, and from Cuba, we got political refugee status. But when I have little kids coming up to me with tears in their eyes and their parents with them and asking me, and telling me I'm afraid to go to school because I'm afraid that when I come home, my parents will be gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, what do you say to that child? And the father's not a crook out stealing. The father's not out, but they're making a living, which is how we're wired as human beings. The fear is real. It's palatable. Luckily, I speak fluent Spanish, so I keep telling people, forget the political rhetoric, forget the political theater. We're the Houston Police Department. We're going to be focused on public safety. If you're a victim or you're a witness, come forward, because we're here to bring justice to you and your families and your neighbors, and bring those criminals to justice. But again, there's so much fear that we are seeing the reporting of crime going down in the Hispanic community across the board, 42.8% sexual assaults first 3 months versus last year. But the rest of the city population, right, crime's gone up. Now, you explain to me, political leaders, how does that benefit the American people? When crime's going up, the reporting of crime for everybody else except Hispanics. If you lose 11 to 15 million victims and witnesses, the intended consequences are that we are all less safe. Nobody wants criminal aliens that are out committing violent crime to remain in this country. I know the mayor doesn't. I know my mayor doesn't. So let's have public policy that's based on what's good for the American people and not what's good for the next, the next primary election. Mm-hmm.
And Mayor, is Newark experiencing the same phenomenon of fewer crimes being reported in immigrant communities? Is that
Well, I would imagine so. I don't know the data off the top of my head that way, but we, in our community meetings that we have, we can see that the residents are less likely to come forward We have processes in place that allow us opportunities to grant them a temporary kind of status if they come forward in a witnessing of a crime or if they're victims of a crime. And they're even afraid to do that as well. So there's obviously a correlation between what's going on and people's ability or will to report crime that's happening in their community and neighborhood.
I have a lot more questions to ask them, but all of you can weigh in as well. So we're going to open it up in a few minutes to questions, start mulling them. There's an email address that others can send in. But let me ask you again, have either of you had a conversation with an immigrant and maybe an undocumented immigrant in recent months that has really stuck with you, that says something about this debate?
Where do I start? I mean, almost daily. I mean, you know, policing is all about relationships, and my job is, if these people are going to live in our city, is build those relationships. And when you're having conversations with parents not wanting to send their kids to school, and you've got to convince them that do not steal your children's future, have them go to school. When you have to take the lead, not the governor in the state of Texas, he's not in the community. It's the police chief, it's the mayor, Mayor Turner. We're taking the lead in the cities to try to make the best of really bad politics, really bad policy, because at the end of the day, we all pay the price of kids not going to school, of a parent being deported. Now you have a family with a breadwinner that's gone. And so these conversations are taking place every day, and I can just assure people that we all need to weigh in, because at the end of the day, if we don't and we're silent, that means you're agreeing. And you can't abstain on issues that are really related to public safety, national security, and economic vibrancy. It's a trifecta when you have these bad policies. Mayor?
Yeah, whether it's a resident on the way home from work who stopped on a bus and asked, everybody on the bus asked to show their ID, you know, who is definitely afraid that if they don't show ID, they're going to be deported. Or the student that I spoke about earlier who works at City Hall, who's a DACA student, who's also, you know, handicapped, who is constantly afraid that he's going to be deported every single day, who finished high school in Newark in flying colors, but do not have the resources to go on to college and cannot get the grants necessary to finish college, who has to work in the city, who every day ask us, you know, what's happening with the federal policy and how is it going to affect his life.
Mm-hmm. And then you asked me something that just came to me. I'll never forget, I started the Explorer program for young people in Austin as a police chief. And one of the first kids we had graduates from high school. Number one, comes up to me, the kid turns 18, tears in his eyes. And I say, what's going on? And I'm not going to use his name because in this environment, I don't want him to be targeted. And he says, I really want to be a police officer, but I'm an undocumented immigrant. My parents brought me here when I'm 3. Goes on to the University of Texas, graduates with honors with a mathematics degree that they don't just hand out, okay? Now they're talking about getting rid of these kids. Now, why would we want this kid who has proven himself to be a responsible member, who's as American as they come, why would we deport them? Especially when you look at the fact that the birth rate is declining around the world, that we're not only going to need immigrants, we're going to have to start competing for immigrants. And quite frankly, we're starting to see that because of the ugliness of the debate here, immigrants, they have choices. They can go to Canada. They can go to Australia and New Zealand. They can go all over the world. The rest of the world's caught up, and if we're not smart, we're not going to be able to compete in a global economy because of the ugliness of this entire debate.
Mm-hmm. We've spoken to ICE agents across the country, and they say that they're just enforcing the existing law on the books. That's all they're doing. Are you noticing more ICE agents out on the streets conducting raids, arrests, other things?
Well, I would say that they're becoming more visible. They haven't done raids and different things like that in our city, thank God, as of yet. Let me knock on something here. But, you know, they are more visible. They're coming to public events and meetings, police discussions, because they're interested in what the city's policies are. Obviously, they have been instructed to be more involved in what's happening. And then we have a policy that's saying that we're not going to cooperate with them in certain instances. So they have to know what those policies are.
Mm-hmm. And you know what, we work very closely. Again, political theater. Houston's a sanctuary city. No, we are a welcoming city and we're a focus city. ICE comes and works with us when they want to go after transnational gangs. Guess what? We work with them because it's in the best interest of the public safety of our community. ICE comes tomorrow and says, hey, we just found this meat packaging plant where maybe 30% of them, or this construction site where 40% of them are undocumented. That's not in my wheelhouse. I don't have the resources. It's an unfunded mandate, and they know that if they want to help us with violent crime, we're all over it. If they want to help us with immigration enforcement for the sake of immigration enforcement, and quite frankly, so far, at least in Houston, our ICE colleagues have done a phenomenal job of focusing on the worst of the worst. Because again, they've got limited resources, there's limited court capacity, there's limited bed space in the federal detention centers, so let's focus on the people that are doing us harm and not focusing on. I like to say I'm going to buy t-shirts and it says Houston Police Department, we go after crooks, not cooks. You know what I'm saying? So, and I actually got an email that after a community forum, I got an email that says, hey, I want to buy one of those t-shirts, so I'm going to have to actually come through and make them. So if there's any graphic artists out there and you want to help us, please help us out.
We may have one out here.
Yeah.
In today's New York Times, we have a piece about a new proposal from congressional Democrats, and that's to give green cards to undocumented immigrants who helped clear the rubble at Ground Zero on September 11th. What do you think? What do you think of that?
I mean, obviously I have to read more about what it is, but it sounds like something that I would be in support of, that's for sure.
The story says it has little chance of passing in this political environment. What do you?
Well, I mean, is it from the fake news or the New York Times? Which one is it?
Well, CNN.
So hey man, you know what? When I go to church on Sunday, I don't forget everything I learned on Sunday and then start doing everything contrary. You know, we all call ourselves people of faith, but then we promote policies and positions that completely are contrary to the teachings of whatever God you're following. I'm saying if somebody was willing enough to go and go through that mess that was the worst, I think, in the history, probably arguably of humanity that day, that all of us remember. It's our Pearl Harbor of our generation. I'll never forget that day. By God, I'd be the first in line to pay for their application fee.
Now, Houston has one of the largest undocumented populations in the country. Data shows it's behind New York and Los Angeles, from what I've read. If all the illegal immigrants were deported from Houston, give us a sense of what Houston would look like the next day.
It would be an economic disaster for the city of Houston. And that's the hypocrisy here. We keep bringing in law enforcement. Listen, folks, we're all being played. It's all political theater, no matter what side. The truth of the matter is that if you wanted to get rid of undocumented immigrants, you'd go after the employers, but they don't do that because they realize that when 60% of the people putting up buildings in a city are undocumented, and now we have, because of SB4, we're seeing news reports that the business community saying we're not getting jobs filled, they're never going to do that because they know that it would be an economic disaster. So it would be disastrous. If you own property, rental property, good luck trying to rent it out. If you have restaurants, good luck trying to get the supplies you need. It would be horrific for all Houstonians.
Mayor Baraka, what would a Newark look like without undocumented immigrants?
It's a very boring city, that's for sure. Obviously, as I said earlier, I think all of the mom and pop shops, the economy would be affected. The diversity that we have, all of that stuff would disappear almost immediately. Whole sectors of our community will be completely gone because the immigrant community has moved out. As he said, it would be an economic disaster.
We are going to go to questions. Adam Bryant is over here and is...
And goes up right here and get a microphone to the gentleman. Thank you. Again, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, Bill Matsakudis. I think there's large agreement on the easy issues of so-called sanctuary cities, that local police shouldn't be expected to go to the Home Depot and round up people that are lining up for work. And at the same time, everyone agrees that if you're a violent criminal offender, you should be deported. So, and I think that both left and right sort of grasp onto sanctuary city to appeal to their base. Mm-hmm. And I think the real question is, what do you do about the hard issues? So Where's the real disagreement? Where there's people who might not have committed a violent offense but are in county jail, should they be cooperating with the federal officials then? Where do you think are the hardest calls, where you really have to ask yourself what's the right thing to do?
Chief, do you want to take that?
Well, let me to be real, quite frank, the hardest call is the fact that the primaries in this country, the people that vote in primaries are extremely left and extremely right, and you can't, and let's face it, you can't get elected. And so the problem is you have to placate the base of the political spectrum. And no matter what side of that spectrum you are, if you're that far to either side, you're not in line with the majority of Americans. We're pragmatic people. I mean, our entire history has been pragmatic. And so therein lies the problem, that we're following policies that are depending on where you're at, right? I mean, I like to say, you want to fix this issue, make every congressional district in this country competitive, 50-50. We're done. You'll have to focus on good policy and not on good primary politics. And I think that's the answer, because they have to placate their base, and their base, quite frankly, isn't interested in good public policy.
Well, you know, I would say that most, like in cities, most mayors want to do the right thing. And there is no like Democratic or Republican way, as was said earlier, to pick up the garbage or clean the streets or make your economy grow in certain instances. But the history of this country is based on people challenging things that we thought were wrong collectively and pushing it to become more and more democratic and more inclusive. Things didn't magically turn out to be great because people agreed, obviously. People disagreed. They had hard disagreements, and hard disagreements caused public discourse, and public discourse helped us change laws in this country so it becomes more democratic for all Americans. And that's what's going to always happen. That's what's going to continue to happen here. And to me, all of it is easy in my mind, because if somebody, the only people that should be treated as criminals are people who, in our city, break our municipal, state, and county laws, or state laws, who break these laws, who are doing things to endanger people's lives, endanger the property, the well-being, and the welfare of the people of the community. And we go after those people, whether they're documented or undocumented. It's fairly simple to me. We don't point at people and say, you're undocumented, therefore you're automatically a criminal. And therein lies the problem, that we're castigating entire groups of people simply because they're undocumented. We use these phrases and terminology that adds to demonizing these people, whether you're calling them illegal aliens or whether you're calling them criminals. All of those things are wrong, right? These people are human beings. They came here to this country in one way or another, and our Constitution provides them safety and opportunity. Give us your poor and huddled masses, and we'll allow them to become citizens, like most Americans. There's no American here that's not a citizen or an ex-slave.
From this side of the audience?
One more?
Hand up there.
Hi, I'm from Miami-Dade County. I'm one of the commissioners on Miami Beach. So this was really controversial because when Donald Trump came out with his sanctuary city demand, we capitulated immediately. And as you know, we're full. We have hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants across Miami-Dade County. So what I'm wondering is, Houston's policy, which is black and white, says that you are going to work with ICE. How do you educate the people and use public funding if you are operating in a gray area, your policy says something very different, and you're still going to engender fear across that community, and that could put your police officers at risk because they might get shot at or have a violent act because somebody's afraid of getting deported, which I think is why we coined the term sanctuary city in the first place. So I was just wondering how you feel about that, Chief.
Chief, give us a sense. The law is it in place right now, or
No, it starts in September.
Okay.
But it's being litigated. Our city and other cities have filed suit, so we don't know what's going to happen in the federal courts. But it just requires absolute daily engagement. You've got to get out of the police cars. You got to get out of the police stations. And what's interesting, when I go talk to the immigrant community, I say, this is a time that, listen, if your nephew, your brother, your sister, your friend is a member of MS-13, which is a horrible gang, it's not the time to have them in your home. Because when ICE comes looking for them, guess who else they're going to take? Everybody with you. And I always say, if you know, our parents used to tell us, tell me who your friends are and I will. Right? You all remember that? And they all finish the sentence. So we tell them we're all going to continue to be focused. We're going to continue to push our federal partners to focus on public safety, right? And to be strategic in terms of the way they utilize their resources. And as long as you're having those conversations, it helps build the trust.
And can I jump in? There's a question from the audience that a lot of the laws we're talking about, the penalties, they're hypothetical right now. What happens if they become real? Paint that picture for us.
Well, it makes it a crime, a Class A misdemeanor, up to 1 year in jail for the police chief to tell their cops they cannot. Basically, I can't tell an officer now at the point of detention, not the point of arrest, but the point of detention, officers can ask about immigration status. Now, I've made it real clear to my officers because they're not going to run my department. The governor of Texas is not going to run the Houston Police Department. First of all, my mayor in Western won't let them, and I'm not. We're not going to tolerate racial profiling.
That's what.
So I want to make my officers write a report articulating what is it about that individual and the set of circumstances they found themselves in that they felt compelled. And I'm going to do that for 2 reasons. Number one, I know that my police officers by and large have no interest in going after economic immigrants. And number two, I want to be able to track the data, look at the data, and be able to push back, because in the left, I don't want some of these activists will start saying that we're racially profiling, trying to create fear. I want to make sure that I can push back on them if the fear should be unfounded, because at the end of the day, we need to win the hearts and minds of the people that are living in our community, and we're going to keep all of us safe.
Great. Chief Acevedo, Mayor Baraka, and all of you, thank you very much for this discussion.
Great job, man.